Welcome to School Britannia, the podcast where two Aussies teach Brits their own history. This is my friend Ellie.
And this is my friend Claire. Let's jump straight to it. What will you be teaching us about today, Claire?
I'm going to be teaching you about a man named Matthew Flinders. So Flinders is famous for leading the first circumnavigation of Australia. He was also the first person to identify it as a continent and kind of introduce it as such to the Western scientific world.
Okay.
I'm telling you about him today because he was in the news recently.
Oh.
They found his remains.
Whoa.
They always knew he was buried in a graveyard in London, but it had been built over.
Mm-hmm.
And they're currently digging up Euston Station, and they found him. They only found him, so all the gravestones had been removed, but they found him because there was a lead breastplate on his coffin.
What?
So they could identify him. So my dad sent me an article about this. And I know the name Flinders, and I'm going to guess you've heard the name Flinders many times.
Well, I'm from Tasmania, so there's a bit of, Flinders Island. No, wait, where's Flinders Island?
Flinders Island, yeah. Flinders Street in Melbourne. Flinders Street Station, Flinders Ranges, there's a Flinders University. There are many Flinders. And I didn't know anything about the man, so I thought it would be interesting to read up on him.
Yeah.
Because this is where British history is so fascinating to me, where it spills out far beyond its own borders.
Does it so often?
So very often. So Flinders was born on the 16th of March in 1774 in Donington in Lincolnshire in England. He's the son of Matthew Flinders.
Oh, wow. Right.
A surgeon.
Keep it in the
his
family.
wife, Susanna. Yeah. Yeah, so Matthew goes and marries a girl called Anne, who they have a child called
Susanna.
Anne.
Oh.
Yeah, it seems to be a pattern.
Like Gilmore Girls.
Yeah. Weirdly, his wife was ANN, and they named their daughter ANNE.
Oh.
It just struck me as really odd.
His wife spent her life just correcting people's spelling of her name, and she was just like, I
So
don't want
over
my
it.
daughter to.
Yeah. So Matthew developed a longing to go to sea, informed in part by reading Robinson Crusoe.
Oh, that's adorable.
In his own words.
Doesn't he get shipwrecked on Robinson Crusoe?
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
A story about pirates. I have a very naval thing going on at the moment.
Yeah.
So he was induced to go to sea against the wishes of my friends from reading Robinson Crusoe. And this was when he was 15. He went and joined the Navy. Yeah.
Oh.
That's how into it he was.
Wow, yeah.
It's who lets 15-year-olds follow strange impulses from reading books? So unhealthy. But it served him well. When he was 17, he sailed to Tahiti as a midshipman.
Whoa.
And then he first went to Australia in 1795.
Wow. So, real soon after, what's his nose?
Yeah. So only 20 years after Captain Cook had landed in Port Jackson, aka Sydney Harbour, which was where the first point that Matthew Flinders lands in as well. He was still a midshipman. He was aboard the HMS Reliance, which was carrying the newly appointed governor of New South Wales, Captain John Hunter.
Wow.
Yeah, so New South Wales at the time was basically the entire eastern half of Australia, and the western half was called New Holland.
Oh, because the Dutch
had touched down first. Yeah, well, according to them anyway. So on this voyage, he distinguished himself as a fine navigator and cartographer, so map maker.
Cool.
He also made pals with the ship's surgeon, George Bass.
Good thing to do.
Make a friend.
Oh, Bass, like Bass Strait.
Yes. That exact one.
All revealed.
Yeah, so Bass was a few years older than Flinders, but he'd grown up in the same region of England, so they became really friendly.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And not long after arriving in Port Jackson, he and Bass made 2 trips in some small open boats, which they called Tom Thumb and Tom Thumb 2.
Oh.
So they took the first Tom Thumb and went to Botany Bay, which was, the spot where Captain Cook first landed.
Yeah.
25 years before. And checked out the Georges River, which is what flows into Botany Bay. And then on the second trip, in the larger Tom Thumb 2, they went south to Lake Illawarra, which is this really big tidal lagoon. So he's already out exploring, checking out, the coastline. And he not only has a lot of stuff named after him in Australia, he also named a bunch of stuff. So he personally never named anything after himself.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah. But he did go around naming a bunch of stuff that already had Indigenous names, but he gave white people names too. So including the name Australia, that he was a huge advocate for that, but I'll get to that at the end. So one of the things he named was the body of water between mainland Australia and Tasmania, which is Bass Strait. And he named after his friend George Bass. Yeah.
kind of cute.
Yeah. So this was in 1798 when Flinders had been made a lieutenant and given command of the sloop Norfolk. I don't know what a sloop is.
Sounds fun.
But yeah, it's just like, it's a ship.
Sounds cool, doesn't it?
Yeah.
A sloop.
And he slooped off down south to chart some things, including the Furno Islands. Furno's Islands. Nother.
I don't know where they are.
They're off you would know exactly where they are. It's just the name of that little group of islands off the northeast coast of Tasmania.
Oh.
That group is called the Furno's Islands.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. The largest one is named Flinders Island after Flinders. Yeah.
Right.
He didn't, again, name it that. Someone did later on. So he was sent down there to chart these islands and find a way around Tasmania, which was still then called Van Diemen's Land. And he did, in the process proving to white people that it was in fact an island.
Yes, because they didn't know for a while.
No, they had no idea.
Huh.
And this was really big because it made the journey from England a lot faster because they could go around the bottom of the world and then through Bass Strait. So at the time they were kind of going
over
a really
top.
weird way, and then you had to go over the top of Australia. So you'd come down the bottom and then up the west coast of Australia and over the top through Torres Strait and down the coast again.
A while. Okay.
Yeah, so instead you do just that thing where you just come down around the bottom of
westerlies.
South Africa and then just keep going.
Yeah.
And then, so it was a lot faster, so that was like this big deal and everyone was really excited. And then the next year he sailed the Norfolk north and charted and white man named a bunch of stuff on the Queensland coast.
Okay, right.
Yeah. So then the year after that he sails back to England.
And his wife is like, oh my God.
Well, this is only 1801, and this is a very big year for him. He marries his longtime friend, Anne Chappell, and he also gets given the command of the HMS Investigator.
That's a cute name.
I know, it's cute. They're all for an explorer. It's a pretty great name.
Investigator.
Yeah. So he plans to take this and explore the western half of Australia. And he planned to take Anne with him because they had just married.
About this.
Yeah.
Did she stow away even?
No, but captains weren't allowed to take their wives with them to the colonies at the time because it was still, everything was really new.
Yeah.
So like the settlement in Sydney was only like 25 years old and like they were still, trying to establish it properly. And so he wasn't allowed to take Anne. It was like against the rules, but he was like, I'm going to do it anyway. And he just kind of like puts her on the ship. They haven't left yet, but he gets his like serious tongue lashing when his plan was discovered and he has to leave her behind. And they don't see each other for 9 years.
I have heard about this.
Yeah.
This is really sad, isn't it?
So like they just got married and then he has to leave her. Which is like, well, I don't know, maybe you should have stayed in your damn country, but that's
just really wanted to map things.
So on this trip, on the HMS Investigator, he explores the southern coast of Australia. He stops off at a few places, draws some maps. Except people keep beating him to it.
Oh, no.
Other white people keep beating him to it.
Oh, like French white people?
Yes.
Yes.
So he stops at Oyster Harbour in Western Australia and finds a copper plate inscribed by Captain Christopher Dixon that says August 27, 1800, Christopher Dixon, ship Ellie Good. Great name for a ship for you, Ellie.
Yeah.
So someone else had been there before him, like had only beaten him by like a year as well. And then he runs into a French ship who was charting the coast for their government. But it's a very friendly meeting, and he actually names that bay Encounter Bay because it was very positive. Like, he directs them to an island nearby that has heaps of, like, kangaroos and water on it because they were running low on provisions, so
it's not
it was all very friendly.
Bruni D'Entrecasteaux, is it?
It is!
Yes!
Yeah.
Yeah, heaps of stuff is named after him in Tasmania.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
There's the D'Entrecasteaux Channel and Bruni Island.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Bruni.
Lots of good oysters there.
They had, sorry to interrupt, I think they had, so that expedition had this really amazing, like, cross-cultural experience with the local Aboriginal people on Bruni Island.
Oh.
And because they camped there for, like, a year, 6 months, and they started to cultivate native crops with them. So so the Aboriginal people were there, were like, this is what you can eat, this is what you can't eat, and then the French people were showing them like what they had. So I don't remember, they had brought seeds with them. And it's sort of held up as this kind of, sadly quite unique moment in like early colonial Australia where these two groups of people met as equals and taught each other things and had a really positive experience.
Oh, that's really cool.
Which is kind of amazing. Yeah. So, that's Bruni D'Entrecasteaux.
Yeah, well, he meets up with them, and they have a really positive experience as well, so it sounds like he was quite a cool guy.
Really nice guy.
Yeah. And then, so Flinders keeps going and he arrives in Port Phillip Bay, which is the big bay that Melbourne is on.
Yeah.
Which, unbeknownst to him, had been, quote-unquote, discovered 10 weeks earlier by one John Murray aboard the HMS Lady Nelson.
Lady Nelson.
So he's been running around leaving all these little stone cans with scrolls in them to mark all these, like, historical moments. Yeah. Not knowing that some other white guy had already been running around doing the same thing.
And Aboriginal people had been there for
Standing there
70,000
like,
years. Crazy people.
Yeah. So by this point, he's, like, kind of running out of provisions, so he decides to just head straight up north to Sydney.
Okay.
And in Sydney, he meets up with someone he had met on a previous trip, an Aboriginal man named Bungaree. Mm-hmm. So I want to tell you a little bit about Bungaree because he's really cool.
Yeah.
He's from the Ku-ring-gai people of Broken Bay, Sydney, and he was born around 1775. Mm-hmm. So he was about 26, 27 on this expedition with Flinders on the Investigator. So he's known as an explorer and Aboriginal community leader, and he arrived in the settlement of Sydney in 1790 with the remains of the Ku-ring-gai mob after conflicts with white settlers on their land had escalated. Yeah. So he made a name for himself as this really intelligent man who was kind of able to bridge the gap between the Aboriginal people and the colonists. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And thanks to this ability, he joined the crew of the HMS Reliance for this trip to Norfolk Island in 1798, where he met then midshipman Matthew Flinders.
Wow, so you met him before.
Yes.
Amazing, okay.
So Flinders was really impressed by Bungaree, and later that year he accompanied him on his trip to Furneaux Islands to work as an interpreter, guide and negotiator with local Indigenous groups.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, so Bungaree was this really skilled diplomat, and even though he didn't speak the languages of the mobs they were encountering, he was able to act as this intermediary between the groups.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so Australia has like 250 Aboriginal language groups. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of them. So he didn't speak the same language as these people, but because he was also a black man, they kind of gave credence to these white men showing up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he just had this ability to kind of smooth things over and be really open and like welcoming to people.
Amazing.
Yeah. So when Flinders arrives back in Sydney in 1801, he asks Bungaree to join him on this planned circumnavigation around Australia. Mm-hmm. And he noted that on this trip, Bungaree was a worthy and brave fellow who, on multiple occasions, by acting as this go-between with local Aboriginal communities who were about to attack the expedition, managed to, like, basically save everyone over and over.
So he's this amazing diplomat, basically.
Yeah, and without him, this trip probably would have ended with the death of a bunch of white guys that no one would have ever remembered.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, wouldn't have been so terrible. And this really cute moment where Flinders also writes in his memoir about Bungaree's good disposition and open and manly conduct and his kindness to the ship's cat Trim. Which I thought was really cute.
Trim is such a good name. It's so funny. That's lovely.
Yeah. So they join up, and the purpose of this trip was for Flinders to fill out the currently incomplete maps of Australia's coastline.
That is amazing how they do that.
I know.
Like, how do you even...
Well, apparently Flinders was just incredibly dedicated and he worked so hard. Like, he did all this himself. He spent all day charting things and all night writing it all up.
Yeah.
And he makes, like, heaps of scientific discoveries. Like, he works out that iron on ships will affect your compass.
Whoa.
And so he makes these huge contributions to navigation, and he's incredibly intelligent and really hardworking.
Have you ever been on, like, a boat going around a coastline or anything?
Not really.
My dad has a little dinghy. And sometimes we take it out, like, in the Doncaster Channel and around Bruny Island and stuff. And it's so, like, it's mind-boggling to think how you would put those, how you can even tell the distances between shapes. And it's incredible. Like,
yeah, it sounds like he was basically like, going onto shore every day, charting a bunch of stuff and getting back on the ship at night. Like, it just seemed like really tedious, detailed work.
And amazing maths, I bet.
Yes,
really.
Yeah. So he did this really detailed survey of the coast of Queensland, which was incomplete at the time. Well, the maps were incomplete. The coast was all there. And then they headed to the Gulf of Carpentaria via Torres Straits. They basically went around that pointy bit of Australia into the dip after it. But it was
highly geographical.
Yes. It's really hard to describe the coastline of Australia. It's odd. But it was around then that they discovered that the HMS Investigator was rotten. Like, literally the boat was rotting.
Oh, no.
Like, irreparably so. And they weren't going to be able to finish this trip as planned.
Okay.
But Flinders was so determined to do this circumnavigation that instead of just turning around and going back, which at this point they were maybe like a third of the way around Australia. He was like, nah, we're just going to forge ahead.
Oh,
so he just kept going, and they went back the long way around the west coast of Australia, along the southern coast, and back up to Sydney.
And they were okay?
Yeah, they survived. And so they did it. They went the long way around and completed the first circumnavigation of the continent.
Wow.
Yeah. And so the really cool fact is that Bungaree was the first person to be recorded in print as an Australian.
Really? Because they hadn't used that
term to refer to anyone before, which means that he was the first Australian to circumnavigate Australia.
That's very cool.
Yeah. It's really awesome. So they make it back to Sydney on the 9th of June, 1803, and the ship is condemned and scrapped. It's done. Yeah. So they've been gone for 12 months, but he'd made heaps of really important observations about tides, and he'd filled in these huge gaps in the maps. He'd got so much knowledge gathered. Yeah. But he couldn't find another ship for more expeditions, and he decides to head back to England. Before we go back to England with Flinders, just a few more notes on Bungaree. He did go on to do other trips, other expeditions on other ships with other people.
Amazing.
Where he, saved more lives by stopping white people from just eating plants that they saw, by being maybe don't do that. I don't really know what that is. And he was dubbed in 1815 by Governor Lachlan Macquarie as chief of the Broken Bay tribe, and given 15 acres of land where he lived and farmed. And he established his reputation as a brilliant mimic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he had this this larger-than-life personality. He used to walk around in these naval uniforms gifted to him, and he could mimic all the governors of the island really well. He spent his time educating people about Aboriginal culture, and was also deeply involved in his own community. Yeah. Took part in corroborees and trading in fish, and just helped keep the peace amongst lots of different mobs.
He sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool. And then he died in Sydney in 1830 and was buried at Rose Bay. And the Bungaree Island off the west coast of Australia was named after him in 1820.
Aww.
Yeah, it was really cool. But Flinders still kicking about. He's on his way back to England. He's on this ship called something. HMS Porpoise. It had a hilarious name.
That's so cute.
Yeah, so he's going back to England, I don't know, maybe to see his wife finally.
And she's just Matthew, oh my God.
Yeah.
Really?
But really, he just wanted another ship so he could finish these surveys, because he just wants to make maps. He's just obsessed with maps.
Focused young man.
Yeah. But the ship he takes command of to go back to England is in equally shit condition. And he has to stop at the Isle de France, aka Mauritius.
I remember this bit. Yeah. Crazy.
It's mad. So at this time, war had broken out again between England and France.
Yes.
And Flinders had hoped, he had this French passport, which wasn't a passport for him, it was for his ship. And he'd kind of hoped that because it was that, and he has this he's on a scientific voyage, that would be fine. And also that this French ship he had run into in Encounter Bay had left favourable reports behind about him, and it had only left Mauritius a day before he arrived.
Really?
Which I don't think he knew at the time, but yeah, he had just missed seeing that ship again. But he gets there, and he got imprisoned. Yeah, the governor of the island was this real jerk about it, and so he imprisoned him and was really mean to him, was really rude and needlessly aggressive about the whole thing. And even when Napoleon was I'll let him go, he's a scientist, it's fine, whatever. The governor was just nah, he knows too much about the island's defences now, what if he brings back the British to attack us? And in the end, the British did attack. They blockaded the island, and Flinders was freed. And then promoted.
Is there something... I might have this totally wrong. Did Napoleon nick his maps?
No, but what happened was, because of the delay caused by his imprisonment, the first complete map of Australia to be published was made by the French expedition that Flinders had run into.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So his, everything was held up because they didn't want him sending anything out of the country where he was imprisoned, because they were afraid it would be secret communiques.
Yeah.
And so he, after all that work he did, he didn't even get to publish his map first.
But was his map better?
Some believe it was. I don't know. How do you judge a map? Not by... I have no standards for that.
Either. Is it pretty? Are there sea monsters in the sea?
Yeah, exactly. Here be dragons. But he finally makes it back to England in 1810. And he's pretty sick, but he immediately starts work on this atlas of his charts and surveys.
You're going to say he immediately hugs his wife. No.
Not interested in that. He's gotta make this map. So So he finishes his maps and they're published in 1814. And he dies the next day.
No.
Yeah. He's like 40 years old. And he's yeah. I don't know what he died of. I couldn't find that out anywhere. But yeah, he dies quite
too
young.
much.
Yeah.
Maybe he caught something weird and
probably
like tropical kind of.
Yeah.
And Anne was like, I spent like a week with you.
Yeah.
Who even are you?
Who is this guy? But he is credited with giving Australia the name Australia. So at the time it was, you know, the colony of New South Wales and the rest of it was just called New Holland.
Okay.
It was completely unexplored by white people. They didn't know it was in the middle. They had this theory there was like a sea, like a river running up the middle. Which was one of the things that he disproved when he did his circumnavigation. He was like, there's no river running up the middle. You can't take a boat through the centre.
Yeah.
So the term Australia had been used before to talk about this southern land, this like unknown southern land. It's something to do with Aristotle had a theory
that the world had to be in balance.
Yes,
like
and
the
it was
Antipodes.
and they later found out that was Antarctica. But at the time, no one knew about it, so they were just so Flinders was like, "That's what Australia is. I found it. That's the one." He wasn't the first person to use the term Australia.
Okay.
And he owned a copy of this book by Alexander Dalrymple called An Historical Collection of Voyages and Discoveries in the South Pacific Ocean. And it seems like he borrowed the term from there. But he was the first to apply it to the continent specifically, not the South Pacific generally.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And then Lachlan Macquarie, the governor of New South Wales, became aware of Flinders' preference for the name Australia, and he started using it in his dispatches to England. And on the 12th of December 1817, he recommended to the Colonial Office that it be officially adopted. And in 1824, the British Admiralty agreed that the continent should be known officially as Australia.
Well, there you go.
That's how we got our name.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was absolutely brilliant.
Thanks. Yeah, I had no idea about this guy. I just saw his name on a bunch of stuff my whole life and didn't actually know who he was.
There you go.
Yeah, it's mad.
Matthew, he sounds like quite a nice guy.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's like he seemed really interesting. He just seemed really passionate and really interested in the work he was doing and really invested in making maps.
Love a good map.
Yep. But what are you going to tell me about today?
Well, Claire, have you ever been to the British Museum?
I have been.
What
yes.
did you think?
It's big, cluttered, full of things that were not from Britain.
I'd say that's a pretty good assessment, actually. Yeah, nice one. They should put that on their marketing materials. So it's the most visited museum in the UK, kind of unsurprisingly, I guess. So they had about 6 million visitors in 2017, which is heaps. And a lot of them were tourists, interestingly. They have some amazing stuff among the clutter, as you said. Most of it from other places. So the Rosetta Stone, for example, which was the key that helped people to unlock hieroglyphics and figure out what the ancient Egyptians were saying. They've got the Elgin Marbles, which are a group of statues that were originally on the Parthenon in Greece. They have the Sutton Hoo ship burial helmet, which is that amazing, that golden kind of mask thing. It's beautiful. Yes. They've got that. They've got the Hoa Hakanai or the Moai, which are the Easter Island head statues. So they've got a really important one of those. And lots of mummies. Just like cat mummies, dog mummies, people mummies.
I'm sure you're going to talk about this, but they also just have so much stuff in storage that we never see. So much.
Like an iceberg.
Yeah.
Just all below the surface.
Yeah.
But how did they get all that? How did it all begin?
What was the nationwide kind of system they put in place to go around stealing things from other countries?
Sounds like you're ahead of the game. I think you know what's coming. So the British Museum was founded in 1753. And it was
before they even sent white guys to Australia.
Before even that. Amazing. And it was the first national public museum in the world. So it's based on the collection of this guy called Sir Hans Sloane.
Who he sounds like an evil guy in a
James Bond movie.
Yeah,
he does. I mean, kind of he was, I suppose. So he was an Irish baronet, a physician. I always think a baronet sounds like a bayonet or something. I guess
just a particularly stabby man.
Stabby man. Like a slightly important man. A physician, a naturalist, and a collector. And as a side note, he's also credited with inventing drinking chocolate.
Chocolate milk! He made chocolate milk! I know about this guy.
Yes.
No, I don't know about this guy. I know that fact about this guy.
I think what it actually means is that he just started doing it in the UK and everyone was like, that looks good.
Give me that. Yeah. Like the Aztecs hadn't been doing it for hundreds of years beforehand.
All over the chocolate situation. So, as I said, he was a collector. And in the 1600s and 1700s, these things called cabinets of curiosity were like the cool thing to do. And Sloane was very on trend with this. So men of means would collect curiosities. So plants, rocks, religious relics. Fossils, exactly. Medical oddities, ethnographic or archaeological objects, just so much stuff. And they'd whack them in cabinets to show them off to their friends.
It's the best way to show off a curiosity.
Totally. And back then a cabinet wasn't just like a little cabinet that we have today. When we think of a cabinet, it would be like a room just stuffed full of junk. Okay. Basically. Over his lifetime, Sloane collected, get this, more than 71,000 objects, consisting of books, manuscripts, and natural specimens with some antiquities, including coins and medals, prints and drawings, and ethnographic material. So that's 1,125 things relating to the customs of ancient times.
Right.
So how did he get those 71,000 objects?
Selling a lot of chocolate milk?
I mean, I wish it was... I really wish I could tell you it was chocolate milk money, Claire.
It's slaves, isn't it?
I'm sorry, baby. It's blood money, not chocolate milk money. So Sloane, in 1687, as an enterprising young doctor, sailed for Jamaica to be a physician to the colony's new governor, the Duke of Albemarle? Albemarle. He also worked as a doctor on slave plantations. So, yeah. So, I guess hopefully...
He stayed at home and published poetry like Robert Burns.
I mean, he might have been helping people. Let's hope he was.
I feel like physicians at that time
people.
weren't helping anyone,
but
regardless of their beliefs.
Sticking leeches on people. But he managed to enlist English planters and also enslaved West African Akan men and women, mainly from present-day Ghana and the Côte d'Ivoire, to help him collect... They must have been like, what the fuck, man? Anyway, they helped him collect 800 plant specimens from around the islands, as well as animals and curiosities.
Right.
So...
Yes, there wasn't the same kind of border control issues with bringing, plant specimens into the country and worrying about bringing
tropical
in bugs.
Diseases.
Yeah.
So, according to James Del Borgo in Hans Sloane's Atlantic World, items in Sloane's collection included... Now, this is pretty intense and doesn't really mention plant specimens or animals. He's got a Barbary scourge with which the slaves are beaten, made from a palm tree, a noose made from cane split for catching game or hanging runaway, I'm not going to say that word, a bullet used by the runaway, not going to say that word, in Jamaica, and a coat of the runaway rebellious, again, that word, who lived in the woods of that island. And finally, a manatee strap for whipping slaves.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So he was collecting really fucked up shit, basically. Like,
I mean, it's awful that those things ever existed and weird at the time for him to want to collect them, but useful for us now to know the reality of that situation.
I guess so.
But at the time, that wasn't what he was collecting them for. He wasn't like, let's
Well, he kind of was, though, because he would display them in... So back then, people used to also, as well as displaying curiosities in their homes, they'd put them up in coffee shops. So in cafes in London, they'd have curiosities. And I think it was the whip that I mentioned, the manatee strap, that was hung up in a coffee shop that people used to just gawk at. Oh. So when we sort of have this idea that British people didn't know where their sugar was coming from.
Not true.
It's not true. They knew exactly how that was being made. Anyway, on returning from the Caribbean, Sloane married a woman called Elizabeth Langley Rose. So she was a widow, and so she was heiress to sugar plantations in Jamaica from her husband, who passed away. And profits from those sugar plantations made it possible for Sloane to collect a crazy amount of objects.
I was going to say, he must have been rich when you mentioned just the sheer number of things he had.
71,000 things.
Yeah.
So he basically used slave money to collect fun little trinkets that he wanted.
Wow.
And he left them all to the nation with the proviso that some blokes got together and found a public museum to show them in, which is the British Museum.
Huh. Very philanthropic.
So it means that the foundation collection of the British Museum was largely bought with money made from the enslavement of human beings.
Wow.
So that's where we're starting at with the British Museum.
Oh, God.
That's before we get to all the other stuff.
It doesn't really get any better, does it?
No. Because after Sloane died, the British Museum continued to collect artefacts, of course, from all over the world. So we were talking about Matthew Flinders before. Captain Cook, who was just before him, brought back heaps of swag from his 3 Pacific voyages. They included heaps of stuff from Aboriginal Australians, and things like a Tahitian mourner's dress. So he was taking like quite important cultural objects from people and bringing them back to Britain. In 1799, a French engineer found the Rosetta Stone, which is, as we said, a big old block of granite that has 3 versions of the same piece of text on it. So one's in ancient Greek, which people could read, and one is in ancient Egyptian Demotic script. I'm not really sure what that is. And
Don't know. Thought I had something exciting to say. Turns out didn't.
Maybe you do, because the other one is ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. So I think Demotic script just must be another way of rendering the language.
I feel like some of these things that I learned about once and have now forgotten everything about.
School. So, it allowed us to translate ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, which is amazing. Like at the time,
it's opened up this whole new world of knowledge of being able to read all this stuff that we had but couldn't understand.
Yeah. But as I said, it was a French engineer who found it, and it was in 1799. So Britain was at war with France.
Oh, of course.
And the engineer was in Egypt because he was in Napoleon's army. And after various toings and froings and battles and things, the British basically got the Rosetta Stone from the French army and whisked it back to Britain. In 1816, Thomas Bruce, who's the 7th Earl of Elgin, organised for half of the surviving sculptures on the Parthenon, as well as sculptures from the Propylae and, can't say that word, to be shipped back to Britain and put into the British Museum. I mean, he wasn't originally going to put them into the British Museum, but
he was just going to take them?
he kind of got guilted into it. He couldn't produce any evidence that he had any permission to take the statues. Like, he said he'd had a bit of permission from Turkey, so from Istanbul, but he could never produce.
Yeah, like they totally said it was fine. It's like when you go to your dad and you're like, yeah, Mum said I could go out with my friends. Even though you know that's not true.
Or if you're off sick from school and the teacher's like, where's your doctor's certificate? And you're like,
yeah, cough, cough. I'm just so sick.
Yeah. So even at the time, everyone was like, yeah, you don't appear to have gotten any permission, and it's kind of a shit thing to do. Like, Lord Byron likened Elgin's actions to vandalism or looting.
Likened, it just straight up was.
Yeah.
It's not similar to,
Totally.
It is the definition of.
And Byron was really into Greece as a nation and was like really, really supportive of the Greeks. So he just thought it was a total crime. And yeah, ever since Elgin took the marbles, Greece has been like, oh, for fuck's sake, please give them back, you absolute assholes. So they've been working to try and repatriate them for like over almost 200 years now.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. So the British Museum also has the 7-foot tall, 2.4 metre Hoa Hakananai, which was a sculpture taken from Easter Island by Richard Powell, captain of the HMS Topaz? Why is he putting an E on the end of topaz? Anyway, HMS Topaz. Just for extra sparkle. So he took it in 1868 and shipped it all the way back to Britain to give to Queen Victoria.
Heavy.
Very heavy.
So he just has the head?
No, it's the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's the whole thing. And I think it is one of the most important of the Easter Island heads. Yeah. And the people of that country are very, very keen to have it back. It's really important to their cultural heritage. So Richard Powell gives it to Queen Victoria, who's like, thanks. I don't really want this.
It's not from Scotland, so I'm not that interested.
I only want wild Scottish statues and castles and mist. So she donated it immediately to the British Museum.
It's like when you re-gift something you don't want.
Yeah, totally. Last year, Easter Island's Indigenous people have asked Chile's government to help them recover the Moai statue, which was removed 150 years ago. So they're working to repatriate it.
Good.
The British Museum holds 6,000 objects from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians, 2,000 of which are stone tools, and less than 1% of that collection is ever on display in the museum.
Jesus.
Yeah.
It's like you're not even showing it all. There's just no argument for you holding on to these things that don't belong to you.
Well, they try though, Claire. So how does the British Museum respond to claims that objects that came into their possession through theft or trickery should perhaps be given back? So just a couple of weeks ago, like 2 weeks ago, the director of the British Museum, Hartwig Fisher.
Wow.
What a name.
Amazing.
He called the removal of the Elgin marbles a creative act. Yeah.
I mean, I know there's an argument to be made for destruction is a form of creation. I don't think it applies in this situation. I think it's just straight up destruction.
Yeah. He said that the British Museum offered a different way of interacting with the marbles, posing different questions because the objects are placed in a new context.
Yeah, a stolen context.
Yeah.
And the different way of interacting with them is looking at them going, hey, you stole them.
And completely in isolation from their context, from the place where they're actually meant to be.
And it's like the Parthenon is a closed-off space where no one would ever get to see them. Yeah. If they were there, they would be seen. Yeah. Absolutely. Like, that is such a, accessible place for...
Absolutely.
Oh, my God.
Absolutely.
I'm so blind to reality.
In 2015, the British Museum even turned down an offer by UNESCO to mediate discussions between Greece and the UK. So at the time, the trustees stated that they believed the most constructive way forward would be to collaborate directly with other museums and cultural institutions, not just in Greece, but across the world, to work out some kind of strategy.
Yeah.
It's really weird. When responding to questions about the return of the Moai, so the Easter Island heads, the British Museum has said, the museum is one of the world's leading lenders and the trustees will always consider loan requests subject to usual conditions. So they just straight up not even talking about repatriation. It's so patronising.
Let me loan you back that thing
that
yours.
I took from you that is so crucial to your self-understanding and your cultural heritage. It's fucked.
Ew.
In 2015... the British Museum and the National Museum of Australia did a joint exhibition called Encounters, and it was about Indigenous Australia. It included objects from the British Museum collections that had never been displayed before and objects that had not been back to Australia since they were originally taken from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians. So they had all this stuff that had never been seen. It had never been seen, and they were taking it back to Australia for the first time, but as a loan. So
just to show it.
Just to show it.
You have that's really yours. Oh, look, taking it back again.
Just
dreadful. So awful.
And when asked by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians about the return of stolen objects, the British Museum again said that they would consider a loan.
No, so it's not enough.
No, it's not. So the British Museum is obviously not the only institution in the world that has stolen objects in its collection and that has done the dodgy in collecting some of its stuff. So the French president, Emmanuel Macron, not Macaron like the sweet, although I wish that were his name, He has decided, so last year he announced that he would commission an independent report on collections, like objects in objects in French museums' collections, and just look into their provenance.
Yeah.
And the report said French museums should return looted art treasures to Africa. So basically it said that, it said that 95% of African treasure is held outside of the continent. Jesus. Yeah, isn't that fucked up? Either in the hands of the old colonial powers or in private collectors, and a lot of that is in France. So France has a lot of that stuff. And Emmanuel Macron is taking the report's advice. So he's enacting a permanent restitution agenda for all art taken without consent from Africa during the colonial era.
Oh, amazing.
And he's already started. So 26 bronze artefacts taken from Benin during the colonial era will be returned from France to their country of origin. Benin is next to Nigeria on the Ivory Coast, so like west bit of Africa. And what's the British Museum said about the French approach? Not much.
Oh, God. Yeah, because they can't say anything because they know it's the right thing to do, but if they admit it, then they'll have to give all their stuff back.
It's amazingly...
It's incredible how tone-deaf they're being to this whole conversation.
I think deliberately.
Yeah.
I mean, they just don't want to engage, like you said. So after a recent exhibition, Magdala, 1868, which was about... so it was an exhibition that was sort of trying to show how the objects in the exhibition were stolen objects. So it was trying to show
in
the context of colonialism. Tristram Hunt, the director of the V&A, said that he would offer a long-term loan again, but did not discuss repatriation.
It's not enough.
I know. This is a V&A as well, so this is a different gallery.
They're all the same though. Like they're just all full of so much stuff that they've taken.
I think it's because, and I couldn't find it again, but I think the board of the British Museum has a policy that makes it almost impossible for the British Museum to get rid of anything in its collection, including by repatriation. Yes, you can.
They act like, we're beholden to these weird bylaws that we ourselves created. What a shame. It's like...
But I think it might even be a government thing. Like, I think the government of the country
that's the thing,
needs
like,
to
rules
do
can
it.
always be changed.
Of course.
It's just, they're hiding behind the fact that they don't want to approach the government and say... Because if the British Museum came out and say, we want to give back all this stuff... then it would be on the government.
If they were really pushing for it, if they were really advocating for it, it could happen. Absolutely. But a spokesperson for the British Museum said, there is great public benefit to material from Ethiopia, so talking about that Magdala 1868 exhibition at the V&A, being represented within the context of the British Museum's world collection, where it is accessible to millions of international visitors a year. So they're playing on that fact that 7 million visits a year.
That's so patronising. Like, but more people will see it here because we're such a great museum. Yeah. It's like, you're a great museum because you stole a bunch of shit from people, and the wealth of your nation is built on the backs of that as well.
Exactly. Oh. Okay, so I think the last word should belong to Henrietta Formille-Marie, who was part of that Encounters exhibition that I mentioned in Australia that was about Indigenous Australia. She spoke at a conference which was part of that exhibition, and she finished with a quote from the late Kevin Gilbert, who was a Wiradjuri activist, writer and artist. I believe that our cultural heritage is ours to share on our terms, our gift to humanity, and not for others to take under the circumstances that we have endured, and the analogy of rape as it is applied to what has happened to our cultural heritage is not far-fetched. That's it.
Absolutely.
That's the British Museum.
That was really interesting. I mean, I knew that all their stuff was stolen, but I just didn't know the details, and I didn't know how aggressively anti-return they were. Still.
It's amazing. It's like they're fossils themselves.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, the attitude, and the attitude, as you said, is so spectacularly patronising.
Yeah.
And complete lack of empathy for anyone.
Yeah. And it's just so disappointing because Britain itself has an insanely rich history that you could celebrate that doesn't
Well, yeah, like
involve
I said,
stealing things from other cultures.
Got the Sutton Hoo ship burial helmet, and that was found in Britain, and it tells a story of Britain, and that's fantastic.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, it is depressing to see the leaders of these cultural institutions be so stuck in the past, but it's such a distant part, a colonial mindset, I guess it is. Yeah.
Yeah, such a shame.
Yeah. So, if you want to hear more history tidbits, you can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Please rate, review, and subscribe so other history buffs can find us too.
If you want to know what sources we use, please go to our SoundCloud page. The link is in the description.
Today's homework is to do some digging through the British Museum website archives. I found that the further I got into this rabbit hole of articles, the more crazy stuff I found about the British Museum's practices.
Yeah.
I'd really recommend...
See how long it takes you in that digging to find an artefact that is actually from Britain.
Nice one.